Good evening. Welcome to another episode of the Alberta Landlord Shop Talk. I am your host, Mackenzie Wilson. I do not have Chris to my left. This left. I have Bill Biko over at the Educated Landlord. Generally pretty reliable. Bill, thanks for coming on the show tonight.
Generally, thanks, buddy.
Gotta keep you
I don't know how to take that. Substitute host. Yeah, I'll be okay. Thanks, buddy.
It's a backhanded compliment. But anyways, let's continue on. So, pretty excited tonight. I know you've got some Saskatchewan roots, right? Right, Bill? You're from out there?
Not me directly. My dad was, and I know people out there. So.
Oh, okay. Actually, you're 1 degree removed.
One degree of separation. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got all of my extended family on both sides of the tree, or mom and dad, all from Saskatchewan. So I speckle that province with family. So
and yet you wore a Calgary Flames hat today. So
first gen Calgarian, and we are doing very well, thank you. This is a phenomenal time of the year.
I get it.
Oh yeah. No, if you watched the game last night, you would have been all over it. Tonight is an interesting show. This is Epic Alliance. For the folks that don't know about them, there was a huge collapse in the media. We're talking millions of dollars, hundreds of properties. And I personally had I crossed the paths with them at a real estate conference, and you actually kicked this video over to me. We have an awesome guest tonight. His name is Conrad. He's a powerhouse mortgage broker out of none other than our prairie neighbors to the east, Saskatchewan. I'm going to say Saskatoon. Hopefully he corrects me if I'm wrong. I'm going off my memory now. But yeah, he had a phenomenal YouTube video, and we kind of broke that down. It's kind of the conversation for tonight, really, because a lot of people got into this program. There's a lot of gray area, and man, like it affected a lot of people.
And there's a lot of money was lost. So there's a lot of anger, and there's a lot of frustration, and a lot of finger pointing. And well, unfortunately, welcome to real estate investing, right? As Conrad mentions in one of his video, no deal is exactly the same every time. You know, there's always something that's a little bit different. And when you're dealing with the scale that these ladies were dealing with, you know, hundreds and hundreds of properties. And from that 30,000 foot view, when you look at some of their programs, it made sense when you dove in, and we kind of talked about this in the pre-show. When you dove in and saw what was starting to happen, you could see where there was possibly some shortcuts taken, and maybe things weren't done quite the way they are. And I've met both of them as well in the past. And, you know, it never seemed like they had any ill intent, but maybe they got, let's say, just too big for their britches.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know what? Conrad did a ton of research. He broke the story. I know I'm not going to take his thunder. I'll let him talk about this piece. Hey, Christine, thanks for tuning in. Hey, folks, when you guys are tuning in, let us know where you're watching from. We love to know where we're getting our views from, and say hi. And really, this is an interactive show. I kind of want to take the lessons learned here so we can avoid this in the future, because it's not the first time. It probably won't be the last time we'll see a investment strategy like this being pitched to many investors, especially new people. So let's kick off the show. As the famous Chris Noble would say, grab a drink of your choice. We'll be back after our intro, and we'll have Mr. Conrad on the show with us. Fantastic. I always love that tune. It just makes me kind of do a little dance here. But Conrad, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You did a fantastic piece on this whole Epic Alliance. I don't know. Sega. Yeah, there's a lot to it, and people are calling it a Ponzi scheme over on the Reddit out of Saskatchewan on that page there. And there's just so many nuances, and you just did a phenomenal piece on your YouTube channel about what's going on. And when we got yeah, you did a phenomenal job. So I'm really thrilled to have you. So thank you for taking the time to come on our show. Normally we talk about landlord problems. This is like, we always talk about due diligence and screening tenants. This is like the do the diligence 5 steps ahead when you're at the real estate conference and you're getting jacked up because everything sounds awesome and you're at a booth and someone's pitching you something. So I kind of want to provide that kind of mentality for our show tonight.
Sounds good.
Cool. So for the folks that don't know who Conrad is, I know you're a phenomenal world-class mortgage broker out of Saskatoon that competes with the I got to tell me, how does the whole award system work? Because you're crushing numbers more than the guys out in Toronto. I think the property's cheaper in Saskatchewan, so that tells me you're probably pushing a little bit more volume.
We do okay. I was actually the awards that I've won. Some of them actually I have to do with like tech and innovation. So like years ago, I had won an award for creating, at the time, was one of the most sophisticated algorithms for pre-qualifications. So you could go and enter your information and the computer would just say, this is what you're pre-qualified. So realtors could use it while they're like with their clients. So that's the first award that I had won. And that was cool. Back in 2015, I think.
Okay. Very cool. We got some hellos coming in. Hey, Jenny, how's it going? Welcome. Bill Fox, welcome back. I think if I recall, Bill, you're coming in from Lethbridge, if I've got my geography correct. Oh, perfect. So yeah, Conrad, so you're a mortgage broker now, and do you specifically focus on any kind of niche? Are you a real investor focused realtor mortgage broker, or just tell me about your business?
Yes and no. I mean, it got to the point where I kind of do a bit of everything. Like when I first started like 10 years ago, I couldn't get a deal to save my life. Like I quit a 6-figure salary job, and like that first year I made like 16 grand. Like it was terrible. Right. Yeah. And so then I was like, I'm just going to be like the best at this. And so I eventually just like went after really, really hard deals, and I got really good at the really hard deals. So then eventually what ended up happening is I just had, every time a realtor would crack, like a deal would crash with a realtor, I was just like, hey, before like pulling the trigger and just like cancel the deal, send it my way. Like, give me 2 days with it. Let me see what I can do. And I literally built like my business off of that model. Nowadays, like I get a ton of referrals. And so now I get the clean, easy deals as well, which is nice. But yeah, that's so I don't really have a niche. The only thing that, like, I was doing commercial mortgages for a while, but we just got so busy with the residential mortgages in 2020 and 2021, especially with rates dipping, that I backed out of the commercial space almost entirely, other than, you know, if I try to do my own stuff. But yeah, for other people, it's all residential now.
Okay. And then you got really interested and you dug your teeth into the story called Epic Alliance.
Well, YouTube, I mean, I started that last year, and I was like, I'm going to like bring a bunch of educational videos and stuff like that. And I started YouTube just so I could like answer questions without having to repeat myself a million times. And then all of a sudden, like, you know, back in October and November when the FCAA triggered their thing, I was like, that's a great story. I'm like, I got to do one on that one. So I had been planning that story for a while there.
Okay, so this is a good segue. So I'm going to ask all of us, including myself, when did you guys first run into Epic Alliance? How did you meet them? Give me some time frame, kind of some background of your relationship or how you know them. So, Bill, you've been a bit quiet. I'm going to go with you first.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Sorry about being quiet. I'll get over that in a minute. I would say, I think it was probably around 2016, maybe 2017.
Okay.
I met them up at a real estate conference up in Edmonton and talked with them a few times up there, and then via Facebook a couple times over since then. So
okay, cool. So real estate conference, they had a booth. They were pitching, or what were they talking about at that time?
They knew a lot of the same people I knew, so we were just sharing war stories and such.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Okay. And Conrad, I think you kind of alluded to in your YouTube video that they got cross paths at another real estate conference as well with yourself.
This is much earlier though, like when they were just getting started. Like I think it was like 2014. I can't remember exactly. It was like 2014 or something like that. It was a real estate conference because they're from Saskatchewan, so they were mingling amongst the crowd because I was brought in as a presenter. And so after finishing the presentation, they came up to me, or Alyssa came up to me and was like, hey, you know, this is what we're doing. This is what we want to do. You know, can you help us, kind of thing. So that's when I first got my first taste of Epic Alliance.
Okay. So you're pretty much at ground zero, the ground level, then I'd say. That's
Yeah,
a fair
I
comment.
didn't have a whole lot of interaction with them afterwards, because I just wasn't a big fan of the model mathematically. Like it wasn't like a huge proponent of it. Some investors
Okay.
I even tried to like persuade not to invest quite actively through 2017 through 2020, but I just said, look, there's better investments, right? So I wasn't involved with them too much, but I always kept tabs on what they were doing, and because I mean, they started out in 20, I don't even remember when they started. I think it was 2014 where they started. And I mean, they were on their way for all intents and purposes to $1 billion, which was their goal. Like they were growing at a phenomenal rate. So I was like,
Absolutely.
maybe I'm wrong, right? Like it wouldn't be the first time, but like, I was really wrong because I thought it was going to tank, and here they are blowing up big time.
And they were getting big enough that you paid more and more attention to it.
Yeah. It was like, I was like, this is amazing. I was like, I don't understand how it's working, but I mean, good for them.
Well, and then I mean, that's okay. We'll put a pin in that because I kind of want to talk about what that numbers and probably why you weren't comfortable with it. Because I had my kind of gut feeling too when I chatted with them at the real estate conference. I chatted same time as Bill, probably 2017 or maybe 2018 at 2 real estate conferences. I saw them back to back, and at that time they had their hassle-free landlord program. So, okay, so you kicked off the video. They came, they approached you. You kind of again caught them early on, and they wanted to help investors get in the program. But there's a bit of a catch that they're trying to work around. And that's what they asked your help on. But you kind of threw up a red flag. What was that about?
Oh yeah, so in Canada, anytime you're buying a rental property, and this hasn't been true forever, right? This is within the last decade or so. Anytime you want to buy rental property, you need 20% down, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts around it. It's not insured. It can't be insured through CMHC, so you need 20% down. And unfortunately, that means that you can't try to like live in it for a week and then get out of it and then turn it into a rental and be like, I lived in it, so yay, there's my 5% down, right? So they were essentially they weren't trying to do this, but they were looking for a way to try to do it. And I said, there's no way to do it legally where you're claiming this thing to be a primary residence and then turning it into a rental. I'm like, that's that's equities fraud. So
yeah, and totally. And probably to be fair, if you caught them at ground zero, everyone literally asks that question when they get into real estate. So it's actually kind of a fair question until you get seasoned. And you're like, oh, that's kind of illegal. Okay, good to know. Don't do
when
that.
You're new, I mean, that's object number one. How can I buy the most amount of properties with the least amount of dollars? I mean, exactly. You could own 3,000 doors and you're still asking the same question, right?
Yep.
Like it's literally the first thing you ask.
Absolutely, yeah. Okay, awesome. So let's tie into where do I want to go. Let's talk about the programs. I mean, I think we need to know what they're offering and what it was. So you said there's two. They had two programs: the Epic Alliance Flip program. I did grab some numbers off your video, so I'll do you the courtesy of putting them back up on the screen, so you don't have to fully recount it from memory. But just kind of give us the rundown on what that is, Conrad.
So the flip program was the one where if you bought, like you could basically buy into one of their properties, they would go ahead and they would, purchase the property usually and predominantly in cash, although sometimes they did have a mortgage on the back end, but usually it was cash. They would go ahead, they would flip it real quick, they would sell it out for a return, and then they would give the money back to you, your initial capital back, as well as a annualized rate. Usually it was 12%, but I've heard upwards of 15%. I've heard some be less, but it was about 12, give or take. And then their hassle-free landlord program essentially allowed you to purchase one of the properties. So the property was in your name. There's some reasons why they did that, but they would allow you to purchase the property in your name. And then you basically they would rent it from you, and then they in turn would sublease it and then take care of all of the management. They would take care of all of the repairs and maintenance. They would take care of any vacancy. You had this guaranteed check coming your way every single month for a fixed amount that when you factored it in with the down payment and all the closing costs required to purchase the place, the 20% down plus closing costs, it worked out to be, a return of somewhere in the neighborhood of 15%.
Yeah, that's when I first heard about them. They were kind of talking about that program, and I only had well, I don't know if I had 1 or 2 doors at that time. It's pretty new, but I had done a bunch of research and I just didn't understand how the numbers were working. I thought the fact that they were guaranteeing a 15% return seemed a little bit crazy because in 2017, 2016, 2018, we had an oil and gas recession. We were flat priced the entire time. The only way you'd be getting those numbers is you've budgeted really well for expenses. You did the right down payment amount, you're cash flowing, and you're appreciating. You have to have appreciation factor tied in there. Your numbers without appreciation just don't get 15% return.
Well, they were banking on appreciation because anytime that you sold the investment, so like the contracts ran for 2 years, and at the end of the 2 years, you had three choices. You could either A, sell it back to them, in which case what you would do is you would sell it back at the price that you bought it for. So if you bought it for 200,000, you would give it, you'd sell it back for 200,000, but you also had to write a check for the amount of equity, so the amount of mortgage pay down. So if you had a $160,000 mortgage and it was $154,000, that $6,000 gap that of principal that you paid down in those 2 years, you'd write them a check for that. So all of that equity was effectively there. So that was their thing, right? Or you could renew the contract, right? Or you could keep it for yourself. But once again, if you kept it for yourself, you also had to write them a check for that other equity, right? Their whole shtick was the equity and the mortgage pay down, both in terms of equity from paying down and equity from house prices going up, which works great in an environment where house prices are continuing to skyrocket, or you'd think.
And they also got to capture that resale price as well. So if they were buying at 140, 130, 150, and then reselling them for 200, there was some repair costs in there, but from all accounts, there wasn't that much repair done on a lot of these properties.
That's debatable on some of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So that could have been another $20,000 to $40,000 cash in pocket, which allowed them to pay some of this funding as well.
Yeah. In and of itself, it doesn't actually sound that unreasonable, provided you're heavily capitalized and you can survive the burn rate.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And folks, if you want to check out this YouTube video, I highly recommend it. It's a fact packed 11 minutes, and it's well worth 11 minutes. Conrad, you do a phenomenal job of just painting a really good picture.
It was so well done that I had to share it with Mac here.
Well, I appreciate that.
And then here we are on a landlording.
Look what I created.
Yeah,
Look what you created, which I created, which Mac created.
Right. So you know what? So I'm gonna pick some pieces out of your video. I'm gonna get you to elaborate on it, Conrad. And of course, Bill, is you see fit, please chime in. So around the 150-minute mark, near the beginning, you said they focused really big on the big picture and the small details we're generally unaware of. This is Epic Alliance talking about it. What did you mean by that? Like, what do you think was at play there?
I mean, there's lots. There's lots that I mean by that. I will condense it. I think, generally speaking, they were two very, very ambitious women that even got some pretty decent mentorship, I would say. I would say they had some pretty smart people in their corner. But by and large, were highly, highly inexperienced. And that in itself isn't a problem when you're small, because when you're small and you screw up, you slap a Band-Aid on it, you learn, and you keep going. But when you grow, and sometimes grow too fast, small problems can escalate and become, a gushing dam, right? So I think that was part of it, right? They didn't have the experience necessary to scale in the way and the manner that they did. That's probably number one. I think two, though, they and by their own admission, right? There's YouTube videos where, I think in one of them, Rochelle says, I'm going to paraphrase here. I have the actual transcript, but I'm going to paraphrase something along the lines of, there's ways around everything. And Alyssa pipes in and says, I didn't know if we should talk about that. Okay, sure. Why not? And then, there's essentially, we love the gray zones is what they said. Right. And by itself, I mean, gray zones are gray zones for a reason. I mean, if you want to be a creative investor, that's awesome. I'm all for it. Sometimes gray zones are necessary in certain capacities. And I'm not about, like, as long as you're in a defensible position, both legally and financially. However, you live too long in the gray zone, you start forgetting what black and white looks like, right? And everything just starts melding together, right? So I think their fascination with getting around things, I think, or getting around rules in particular, I think really put a lot of stress on their strategies, because at the end of the day, something was going to crack, and they forgot many of the reasons why those rules were in place to begin with.
Right.
And when you go in scale, those issues become so massive as that scale grows.
Yeah.
And when one of those legs comes out from under your table, it's a bigger and bigger fall. And you alluded to a bunch of that in your video as well. Between COVID and some of the thefts they were going through, they had some big cash holes.
They did.
Yeah.
And I mean, that goes to, though, right, to their initial strategy. And I think there was, once again, they were looking for big wins, not necessarily consistent wins. They were looking for big wins. And so I think that drove them into certain neighborhoods that I personally would invest in. I mean, I know some people who do and do it well. It is not my flavor.
Yeah, it takes a certain investor and a niche kind of target and strategy to work in different demographics, right? So you can do it probably everywhere, but you got to be prepared for those like the devil's in the details, especially in those areas. I mean, so that's a good segue that Bill brought up. Like, what went wrong? So you mentioned low income neighborhoods, so maybe you can help us color what that really means, because we're not from Saskatoon, so when you speak these neighborhoods, they don't mean much to us. And then you talked about some theft, and then this thing called a pandemic kind of happened. So let's paint that picture.
So, I mean, to give you an idea of the neighborhood, I mean, across the street from one of their houses, there was someone who was shot, right? And I mean, when I hear something like that, I mean, I have a strong aversion to being shot. I don't like it so much. So I typically avoid those areas where I have to go check up on places where you could get shot. But they didn't even really factor in vacancy, right? So it's like, let's use vacancy as number one, right? Vacancy is massive in those areas, highly, highly transient places. A lot of times renters are going to trash the property on their way out. It's just the characters you're bringing in there. And so as a result, you have a repair and maintenance portion of it that comes, and there's a cost to that. That's a second piece. But I mean, the time it takes to do that also affects your vacancies as well. And a lot of times, what a lot of people don't know is anytime you have gang activity in your house, there's certain protocols that are recommended in order to wash that away. So for instance, if something's a safe house or a cash house or a gun house or whatever, where these things are stored, a lot of people in the neighborhood or community or in these gangs think of that house as that place. So the moment you evict that gang member, that's the cash house, the safe house as an example, you have to have a vacancy for a whole 3 months. You can't stick another family in there, right? Because then another gang member is coming to check it out and be like, where the hell's my cash, right? So you have 3 months of vacancy to let enough of the community pass through it where people know that's no longer the safe house. That's no longer the cash house, right? So all of a sudden your vacancy isn't just 8%, it's 3, 4, 5 months of the year, right? So because as soon as you get a gang member in there, it's way worse than just the traditional vacancies, right? So you have all of that vacancy there, right? And they're, like I said, every month writing guaranteed checks. So you have that bleed. But then on top of that, the repair and maintenance. So you all of a sudden have, costs. Just anyone who owns a rental property knows repair and maintenance is a thing. You might get away without for a year without paying anything in R&M, but guess what? Next year is going to be twice as expensive because it all averages out, right? Yep, so you better 100%. Hold it aside. So, you got the repair and maintenance side of it. And then the pandemic obviously hit, which affected both of those things too simultaneously. Now you had people who were living in the houses, but didn't necessarily need to write you a check because the government said, don't worry about it. Landlords can cover it. And then you had the second portion of it with skyrocketing prices on all of the costs to construct. So now R&M itself went and increased in cost. And in their position, when you're heavily, like I said, you need a huge treasure chest to battle all of those cash reserves because you're bleeding money every month. You've signed a contract to your investors to give you that payout.
That guaranteed return was like wild to me. I'm like,
and that's where we get into the Ponzi type scenario, because
that's
now
where
they had to bring money in to fill those other areas.
Yeah.
And it's probably where it started going even more sideways, is they're robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Yeah.
And then somebody was robbing Paul.
Like I'm super cautious to always call things like Ponzi schemes. I'm super cautious to say they intended to do it, right? Because who knows? Was it their true intent? I guess we'll find out, and we can't technically call it a Ponzi scheme until they've actually been proven in court, which is going to take years.
100%.
But we can ask questions. We can ask questions like, if the money wasn't coming from rent, where was it coming from, right? Because those are totally legitimate questions to ask. Right.
And those are the questions that will be asked. And
100%.
And that's what it looks like. The reality we may not find out for years, or we may never find out.
Well, actually, the lawyer representing a lot of the investors has already done forensics or hired an accounting firm to do forensics on the financials. And they have already confirmed, to my knowledge, that that some new money was used to pay old money. They haven't defined timeframes. They haven't defined how large of a percentage. They haven't defined a total quantity. But in some part, that was true.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, we all kind of know, but
right, like how they keep the ship afloat at that point.
Yeah.
So
and again, it wasn't intended to be Ponzi freight from the beginning.
Oh hell no! I actually think they had true good intentions.
Yeah, but it kind of evolved into that gray area where they tried to survive.
Yeah,
and just got worse and worse.
And you know, and in credit to them, they tried to fix the situation. But before I get into that, because they were doing a cash call near the end for a crazy amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
These points we just all talked about, where like a vacancy rate. I mean, again, you can factor in wherever you want. It will vary by demographic in the area, but the benchmark or the norm at least is typically looked at 8% annually, which is equivalent to 5 to 8. 8% equals 1 month's vacancy of not having that rent come in. And we always preach on this community of being a community of landlords is all of your work to put a tenant in place is done up front. If you do your right work and do the right due diligence on checks and balances, you put the right person in place, they pay rent. The rest of the lease is actually the term of the lease is pretty straightforward. You answer a phone call here and there, you check in, give them a Christmas card, and then that's it. So you talked about vacancy rates, the demographics of the areas, the repairs, and like these are all good questions to ask. Like, okay, so you've got this guaranteed landlord or this hassle-free program. Tell me the numbers, break it down for me, get them to walk through the numbers, because you'd probably start hearing holes if they weren't super clear on some of this stuff, or not even factoring a key variable like vacancy.
And part of it was actually pretty clever on their parts, right? I mean, at the end, like people would ask them quite consistently, you know, why don't you buy the properties yourself if it's such a good deal? Which is, I mean, that's a natural question. And their answer was always, well, the banks will only give us so much money, right? Like the banks are only going to lend us so much. And that's actually true to a large extent, right? There's only so much risk that any institution is going to put on that. But I also think it was convenient from their perspective, because it also fielded the other side of the equations. What if something goes wrong? Well, you own the house, right? Yeah. And it's like, wow, what a great backup. If something goes wrong, I own the house. And, you know, usually whenever I'm like helping people decide, you know, like, is this a property you want? Do the finances work and stuff like that? I always ask, is the house even something you want, right? Like if you're stuck with the house, is that a good thing? Right. And a lot of their cases, it wasn't. So, I mean, I don't know what percentage it is, but I know quite a few people who didn't end up on the plus side on that when things went bad. Right.
There was even a couple houses that I have heard of that were fire damaged severely.
I think one was straight up missing.
Yeah, pretty well. Severely fire damaged. And there was nothing to have financing on. So it had to be rebuilt by the new owner.
The person. Yeah. And no claim, no nothing.
Yeah, I mean, the flip side, if I'm going to play devil's advocate here, is at least you were given an asset in this bankruptcy or this dissolve or the shutdown of this company, where most times your SLL, you get nothing. So, I mean, that's a bit of a silver lining. That's probably why it was an enticing deal that people got into.
I'm going to challenge that just a little bit.
Do it. Good.
Because here's my thoughts. Because if you're a sophisticated investor like yourself, Absolutely. That's a no-brainer. You've internalized a lot of checks and balances in place that you might take for granted that you don't even know that you know, right?
Correct.
Like if you ask a
100%.
grade 8er, what is 2 + 2? Well, that's brain dead. That would an easy answer, right? But if you go to someone grade 1, they're like, I don't know, we got to think about it, right? You're already advanced enough. A lot of people, especially when they're new to real estate, they get into this mindset that it's almost like stocks. The worst that could happen is I lose my money, right? I lose my investment. Real estate, that's not always true. If you have a deal go bad, there's a really good chance you might have to put even more money in, right? Your losses don't necessarily stop at your initial investment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in your case, right, like, yeah, you get the asset, but that's not necessarily a good thing because your losses don't necessarily stop. You might have to rebuild an entire house. You might have to, like, there's all sorts of other stuff that might happen afterwards.
As a crystal clear example for that, Conrad, here you have this house that you've got $160,000 worth of financing on that needs another $20,000 worth of work to be worth $160,000.
Right.
And then you still have to pay for a realtor to sell the place.
Closing costs.
Suddenly you've got to drop another 15 grand in, and it's been vacant this whole time. So now you're another 10 grand in that you've got to pay for mortgage.
Exactly.
Cost. And you're 40 grand in on this property you were never ever going to lose money on.
That's right. And all of a sudden it just keeps losing and losing and losing.
Yeah. And it's tied to your finances because you're on mortgage and on title.
That's right. And you're sure as hell not going to foreclose because the moment you do that, you're screwed on literally all other investments for the next 7 years. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So like,
I like
your
that.
end, right? You've internalized a lot of those things. You have like the odds that you're going to fall into that is very, very low, only because you have so much other experience to compare it to. But someone who's new has none of that, right? Like this is the first time they're seeing it in their heads. They go, wow, that's great. An asset that I will have if something goes wrong. It's perfect. Right.
Yeah, no, but the one that keeps on bleeding and bleeding. So that's a really good. See, that's why I wanted to have you guys on the show because perspective is so important, right? So yeah, because I go back to I do a lot of due diligence, and then my whole way I got into this real estate game was I was super scared of getting 2 mortgages and getting piled on debt that I can't look after, I can't service, or I have the tenant that goes on a tear and does the tens of thousands of dollars in damage and the emotional stress and all that stuff. All that freaked me out. So I figured there must be a system somewhere out there because people have been doing it for a long time. So I just started researching. I found this educated landlord site. It's okay. And anyways, it was I learned a few things here and there.
Some guy.
Yeah,
just some guy.
Some guy.
Yeah. But that is like, yeah, you
But
do
it's
hit the
also
nail on the head.
interesting because there were quite a few sophisticated or semi-sophisticated investors involved in this as well.
Oh, but I think that's different.
Yeah, so some of those saw, let's just call it the longevity, and saw it continue to move forward, and the excitement that both of them brought to it, and that may have dragged them in with that as well.
So I think there's a few different things there, right? Because in at least some of the cases that I've analyzed, some of the sophisticated investors did their due diligence up front in 2015, in 2016, when some of the numbers were actually more solid. And they stopped doing their due diligence because, well, I've already done it on this one property. Why would I need to do it on the next? These people know what they're doing, but they stopped checking, right? And you can call it whatever you want. You can call
different
it
times probably too, right? 2017 check, and then 2000 they come in 18 months later.
And they just stop doing due diligence. Like, there's stories out there where, someone did a check and they're like, yeah, that house is worth 140. And they know what they're doing. And then they sell it. They buy another one from the landlord program. And that one isn't even close to what it should theoretically be worth. But because it has an appraisal, it's got to be right. Right. So I think there's certain checks and balances that some of these sophisticated investors didn't do. Some of the things, though, I will say, though, is I think some of them just took shortcuts. And I'm going to be blunt. I'm going to call a spade a spade. I mean, if you're an unsophisticated investor and you sign a promissory note, I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to say, you know what? You didn't know. You probably should have gotten legal advice. They would have told you not to. You shouldn't have known. But if you're a sophisticated investor and you signed a promissory note, I'm going to say you definitely should have known better. Right.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go to that part then. So So they were doing these promissory notes.
I guess
At
one other
what
thing
point
we
was-
should probably touch on is that other wheel that fell off of their wagon. Because of that neighborhood, there was a ton of thefts going on, which hit them for a ton of losses as well.
Yeah.
So what was the story there?
Oh man, they were like going after all the copper pipe. Like they were like tearing apart kitchens and bathrooms. I mean, you can Google it. There's photos online with like just kitchens torn apart for like what, like $112 worth of copper pipe. Like it's
$10,000 kitchen torn apart for that $100 worth of pipe that they then would have to rebuild. Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. And like that was happening quite frequently. And so in the end, I think by 2020, maybe earlier, they were starting to convert to like the PVC pipes or whatever they were, right? To prevent the theft, because just replace it with something that has no meltable value. But it's
and that's wild too, right? Because you said a $10,000 kitchen, they go for the internals of the wall and get piping. They're literally rebuilding almost that entire kitchen. Like there's no, it's not like
actually even worse because now you've got to demo it as well and start completely from scratch.
Yeah. Well, and then on top of that, so this blends into some of the other stuff that we were talking about. How do you mitigate against those kind of thefts? Well, you put boards up on your windows so you can't see in. You put drapes, bed sheets, whatever, constantly covering the windows. And that ends up being a pretty effective. I mean, it makes your property look like crap, but it
devalues your property even more.
Yeah, it does work as an anti-theft, right? It's also really convenient, whether intentional or not, for hiding vacancies.
When it's boarded up or not boarded? Oh, not boarded up.
Boarded up. When it's boarded up, or if the windows are always covered, as a landlord, you could drive by your own property and never know if it's actually someone living in it or not, right? Because you'd always have at least one light on. That's part of the anti-theft. Keep a light on, all the windows boarded, and it always looks like someone's home, right? That's why the anti-theft works.
Yeah, I don't know if windows boarded up would tell me that someone was living there. That tells me.
The lights, like the lights on and all the windows covered. I shouldn't use the term boarded, right?
Yes, that's
it could be bed sheets, it could be whatever, right?
I see. Oh, yes. Like exactly. But they didn't do that.
You can't see in, and then you think someone's always living there.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Unless you have no money for repairs, and then nobody's going by there for weeks at a time, which just creates more problems.
Yeah, that vacancy. I mean, that's the whole thing, right? You could have the perfect property with all the right amenities close to that college or C-train or permanent transit or whatever it might be, and the business is close by, and it should generate revenue. But if you don't put the person that can pay, it don't matter.
Vacancies kill landlords' dreams.
Yeah. Wow. And like I said, the vacancies in these cases were astronomical.
Yeah.
Like just because of all the other things that we were talking about.
Yeah. So let's go to that point then. They did this cash call, and it was in the millions.
What was that prior to that was the promissory notes that you had touched on there, right? Because I mean, as a business, what do you do when you need money? I mean, it's pretty standard. You actually go and you ask current investors for more money. That's actually a pretty standard process. Or you debt finance, right? It's either investor or debt, and in their case, they definitely weren't getting debt because no one was they were already leveraged from that perspective. So the only thing you could really do is go to the investor. So, I mean, it's a logical argument. It's a logical journey as to how they got to where they got as far as those promissory notes. Promissory notes in and of themselves, they're supposed to be quick in achieving their goal of raising money, but that's all they are. They forego a lot of the formalities of a true stable contract because there's no security, there's no any of that stuff, right?
So let's clarify, what is a promissory note exactly? Is it an IOU?
I promise to pay you.
I promise to pay you in its simplest terms. I will take this money and I will pay you. Sometimes there's a defined percentage. In this case, I believe there was. I think it was 15%. And then sometimes there's a defined repayment period, which. And I don't even know if they had a repayment period in these cases, right? So we will pay you this X amount of percentage on an annualized basis at some point in time in the future. We'll give it to you back, kind of thing. I think some of them were for 6 months, some of them for 3 months, some of them for longer than that, a year or whatever. But so effectively you go back to all these things. Now, promissory notes, like I said, there's no security, there's no nothing, right? And so if you, truth be told, a lot of that money, and I'm not a lawyer, so maybe I'm going to be wrong on this, I can't see how any of those investors are going to be able to go after those promissory notes, right? Like, because the promissory notes effectively are just IOUs. Yeah, it's a piece of paper. Like, you have nothing. You just hope that they pay you back. You hope that they're in good standing, right? And now that they're in bankruptcy proceedings, I don't see how you can go after them, unless you can go after some like criminal conduct, and maybe. But I can't see how you would otherwise.
Full circle back. If they're in bankruptcy and they have no assets,
who do you go after?
Where do you get the money?
Yeah, who do you go after, right?
Pennies on the dollar.
So they had all these promissory notes. They raised a lot of them, and to my knowledge, I think it's like somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $20 million in promissory notes, like gone, just like that, and which is a lot of money. And then, of course, what happened later though was, and I think some people may know this because it hit the news, the FCAA put a cease trade order, and they said, like, look, you can't do this anymore. And I think at one point they were saying that they were only selling to family and friends, which of course everybody knows is not true. Like, which is just
big family.
Thing. Yeah, it's one of those big Italian families.
Very great family.
But
the grandchildren bought 3 houses each.
That's exactly. So I mean, in their cases, it was like FCA, puts them under independent panel review. So they're going through that process, basically to stop doing it. And it wasn't long, right? I think it was only like a month. And that was long enough to really put the cash crunch on, right? Because we talked about needing all that massive draw of cash, which was exacerbated by the pandemic, which was exacerbated by their tremendous amount of growth, which was exacerbated by rising costs and like all of those things combined into one big thing, boom, and then all of a sudden no money. And no ability to bring in money, which is so all of a sudden they're like, well, look, guys, we need, a lot of money. So we're going to raise $10 million. And, they talked about $500,000 of that going to paying off, existing requirements.
Yeah. Getting caught up in current liabilities. Yeah. Cash call for 10 million, 5 million going to getting caught up in current liabilities. Yeah. My take on this is probably why, again, I think they're trying to do all the right things. Well, okay, let me rephrase that. Sorry.
They were being coached by somebody as to what to do. So whether it was legal advice or somebody was guiding them if they were doing.
Oh, okay. Okay, fair enough.
I agree. To like mostly. I agree mostly.
Yeah. Maybe not advising them well.
Yeah. Well, I think they were getting great advice. I think they shot from the hip a lot because I know there was one email that went out when the FCAA originally triggered them. And this is what I've been told. I can't say definitively, but apparently there was an email that went out saying, don't talk to the FCAA. This is just a sign of our growth or whatever. You're not required to talk to the FCAA. This is a sign of our growth. This is all good things. And then it was like 2 days later or something like that, where they're like, see attached notice from our lawyer. And then it was like repealing everything that they had said in the previous email, basically saying, no, you're required to talk to the FCAA if they contact you.
Oh,
right?
man.
Yeah.
So that just kind of paints a picture of their mode of operation, right? Probably from day one.
Yeah, shoot first.
Yeah.
And like I said, like they had a lot of ambition, and I think the reason why it didn't crash sooner is actually because they had a lot of good intentions. I actually think if they had the lack of good intentions, particularly in the early years, they actually would have crashed a lot sooner. Right.
Probably.
Like if they had tried to be shysters, they would have been caught. You know what I mean?
Yeah. People see through that quicker, sooner than later.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I do think, especially in the early years, they did have good intentions, which I know is really hard for some people to believe, but I do think that's true.
Yeah. And the compounded issues of COVID and everything else that was going on, just
100 doors,
100
mortgages, promised guaranteed cash flow, and not even looking at vacancies, damages, pipe being ripped out of the walls. That is a lot of money, and it piled on super fast.
Well, it's also a contradiction of strategy, right? Like anytime you own a rental property, it's very, very rare that you buy a property and charge like max rents. Very rare, right? Yeah. Typically experienced landlords, what they'll do is they'll be like, this is what average rents are. Ours are here. And it's not a huge discount, but it's just enough that they can be super picky as to the tenants that go in because they have a bunch of people competing for it. And that's great, right?
Yeah.
In these neighborhoods, though, the rough neighborhoods, the bruised neighborhoods, the whatever you want to call them, And then they were going in trying to go for max rents on top of that, right? Because they have to, because they have all of these cash commitments that they have to try to, and cash requirements that they have to service. So you're trying to go for max rents in a neighborhood that doesn't necessarily support max rents. So it's this clash, it's this contradiction of strategy. And I think that's where fundamentally, like their flip program, I actually think they knew enough about what they were doing that had they stayed just on the flip side, they actually could have done relatively well.
I think so too. They're both by occupation. One is an electrician, and the other one, they're both trades, I believe, right?
I think they're both electricians.
Yeah, and like they knew what they were doing as far as flips, and I mean they were hard workers. I will say that, like, hands down. I will give them full credit for how hard they worked. But like I said, when it came to the more sophisticated program, and when they started selling from one pool to the other pool, I think that's when you start getting into some complications.
Yeah, interesting. That's so interesting. So I want to sum this up kind of cleanly, and I'll challenge both of you. No. Not what happened, but like, so I'm new. What's one or two takeaways I can take from this conversation if I'm ever at a real estate conference? Because I want to get in the game. I know if real estate's done right, it can pay dividends and all that good stuff. You know, I read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and now I'm here. So, like, what's something that you guys would say? What would be one key takeaway that if you heard this story, what was your red flag? What was something that was your spidey sense was going off? Bill.
Right. Yeah.
I'm a little cynical. So
everything?
Every day. I always find it a little challenging, all these investors pushing their investments at these real estate conferences. They might get some of the newbies that are potentially there, but the point of these newbies, these new investors, is to get educated about this so they can do it on their own. And so many new investors are so scared to do this on their own that they either want to find somebody who may be doing this right, or a partner that they can share some of the potential panic and loss with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they fall into this trap. They're going, well, these people look successful. They don't have the skills yet to properly analyze what's going on. They don't have the skills yet to properly understand what all of this is. And, you know, they should probably take more time to become educated landlords. Hey, nice how I got to throw that in.
Nice.
And learn about a lot of these steps before they've overcommitted themselves.
Hashtag self-plug. Okay, and Conrad.
Well, before I say mine, I'm going to actually add to that, because I think I think that was a really, really great point. A lot of these new investors eventually want to do it on themselves, but they usually lack the confidence, experience, whatever. I would say to anyone watching those, find people like Bill. Find the people who have shown success and want to see you succeed. Like, even for myself as an example, like if someone's new to investing, am I going to bring you on to one of my investments? No, you probably don't have enough cash probably to do that. However, that does not stop you from going out to find investments. And if you find an investment, bring it to me, right? I might be able to help you close it, right? So, and I'm sure Bill and Mackenzie would do the exact same thing. Like, if you find an investment, you're like, wow, this is a banger, I got to be a part of this. There's a good chance if you bring it to someone you can trust or know that's not going to like straight up steal it from you, you know, that person can work through that deal with you, and potentially there's a good partnership there where you as a new investor get an education, but because you went and you did all of the extra work to source that deal, right? So there's a bit of training that I do with some new investors that I say, go find this, and if you find this, come to me and we'll go through it together, right? But my one takeaway that I would say is get rid of this notion, and it's not necessarily pointing out red flags. It's more of a mindset to hold yourself in. Get rid of this notion that real estate is passive income. Real estate is so much work. Like, if you're watching a YouTube video and you're like, wow, I get to buy a property and then go sit on my ass and watch Netflix while the rents roll in, I am sorry. That is not how it works.
Surprise.
You are not meant to be a landlord. I'm just going to tell you that right now.
That's the millennial plug. I like that. That's totally it. I would say I knew nothing when I got in the game, and I knew I didn't know a lot for a while because I didn't have any way to define that. So I sat and listened to a lot of conversations and did a lot of research, and I heard commonalities along the way. I'm like, oh, okay. 10 people said this is the right way. This is probably correct. And then I think it comes down to knowing your numbers and budgeting. And well, you know what? If I'm going to do, I'm going to save some money and self-manage for the first 5 years. So they build a pro forma and there's no property management costs associated in that pro forma. And now they just bought themselves a job that they can't get rid of if they find out they hate it after the first year. Right. So you gotta run a full picture, a full look on that property every time for all your expenses and costs. So you get the true numbers and do lots of them, because then you'll get comfortable.
And run it by somebody you trust that is experienced. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, generally speaking, people who are successful are very, very busy when it comes to real estate. Like, they've always got a deal on the go. They're always doing something. But if you can get in with someone and they like you, right, and they're experienced and they know what they're doing, they'll take the 10 minutes to run through your deal with you and just be cognizant of their time, right? If they tell you, hey, I got 10 minutes, get through the bullshit real quick. Just go, this is the numbers, and be on point, and then let them give you their point, and then take with that and go away. Like, there's many people. The one thing I will say about real estate is it's often a very tight-knit group. Once you're in, people know you, it's great, but they're also usually really willing to coach you if they like you. That's the key part. So leave your pride, your ego, all that stuff at the door to say, admit when you don't know something, but show that you're actually willing to put the effort to learn and actually like apply what's being taught. Like, for instance, if I teach somebody something and they don't apply it, I have zero desire to teach you something else.
Absolutely.
Like, zero.
And that's why Mac and I are still talking now.
That's right. But yeah, so it's interesting, but don't be scared.
No. Well, you know what? We're coming up to the top of the hour, and what a way we've covered basically everything. You did say, so I was going to ask going forward, you kind of already touched base on that. There's where does this story go now with Epic Alliance?
I think it's going to wind its way probably through the courts. I would be shocked, just based on some of the people who have reached out to me and some of the conversations that I've had, if there isn't some kind of exploration of criminal charges. I think that one might be tougher because you have to demonstrate intent and all sorts of other stuff. But
for sure,
I think this is going to play out very slowly for the next 2 years. Bankruptcy proceedings only last 12 months. They started it 2 months ago, I think in January, right? So they got another 10 months of that to go before anything gets really, really crazy. So I think it's going to go quiet for a while, but hopefully the lessons will.
So we got a little bit more time to wait for this story to pan out. So let's just keep our eyes peeled, and we'll throw.
Maybe
articles.
We can do more of this later.
Yeah,
hey, it's a good segue.
So see you same time next year, guys. No, just kidding.
Yeah, same bad channel. Yeah, perfect. Well, Conrad, thank you so much for coming out. Bill as well. Always appreciate your wisdom and coming on the show to co-host with me. Gentlemen, I'm gonna do my usual thing when I don't forget to do it. Do you guys have a passion project or charity that you guys want to give shout out to, or just anything that you're working on right now? I always like to do this to give back, since you guys gave your time to the community tonight. So, Conrad, I'll let you go first.
Oh, it's just my YouTube channel. That's my baby right now. I mean, I have kids, so don't tell them that, but my YouTube channel is truly my baby. So yeah, you can check me out on YouTube. It's just my name, Conrad Neufeldt, with the T on the end.
Okay. Perfect. I will drop that into the comments so people know how to spell your last name. And then, I didn't even copy my show notes, so I can't do that. Okay. Bill, is anything you're working on these days?
Still just banging away at my regular stuff. So I'm on the page all the time. You may see me there on occasion, answering questions, making up answers, all that fun stuff.
Making up answers.
Isn't Bill? Isn't your wife doing like some an art exhibit or something I saw recently on Facebook?
They're all over for a few months. We got the Leighton Center in the summer, but that's still a couple months away. But she had a couple of big shows the last few months here, so
getting some brownie.
Now we're quiet again. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Well, folks, that's basically it. Thanks for tuning in. It's, again, a very different show. We weren't talking about tenants or evictions or landlord problems or marketing or any of this other stuff that we usually talk about with rentals. We just talked about an opportunity to get into becoming a landlord through a third party and probably the good questions to ask. And I hope you guys found it very useful in this conversation, as there's so many different nuances in the story. And like I said, I think we all believe these ladies had great intentions to start off. Unfortunately, the execution, and they grew so fast, created just a scenario that wasn't very pretty for the folks that are left holding the bag. So we'll follow the story, continue on. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us on the Alberta Landlord Shop Talk. Also broadcast over in the Saskatchewan landlord community. And I forgot to mention, but it worked out perfectly. I'm home alone tonight with my two boys, 5 and 2. They have tablets in the bed and they're fully charged. I must have gone okay because no one came in the room tonight. So
that's the sign of good parenting right there.
Yeah, nailed it. So folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next Wednesday, 8 o'clock. One of our eviction experts, Don Gray, up with Edmonton Eviction Services, will be on the show next week. We haven't really finalized a topic yet, so I'm just going to do a little research on that in the next couple of days. But if you've got questions, reach out to me, and we'll definitely pick Don's expertise, and we'll answer some questions and help some landlords out. That's what this community is about. So, folks, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week.
Good night, everybody.